But first, the standard disclaimer. All information here in this lecture is for education purposes only. If you have a specific medical situation with a specific medical condition, you really should talk to your doctor first. All information is based upon the average person of average health and physical ability, again, and also assuming no medical condition that is contraindicating any of the advice here. If you do have specific question about your specific medical condition, you really should talk to your doctor first. When you do, they may refer you instead to a nutritionist or dietitian. Doctors, at least when I went to medical school, doctors did not actually get a class on nutrition, an entire semester class. Instead, it was a chapter in an otherwise thick textbook about metabolism. But then that's not giving you actual specific nutritional advice is not the doctor's job. Surprise, surprise. The purpose of seeing your doctor first is that they know your medical condition, they know your medical situation, and if you go to them with the hottest, fattest diet of the day, they can evaluate the description of the diet against what they know about you, and then they can say whether that's a good idea or not so good idea, or what is it about this diet that you're describing could cause a problem with your situation. If you want to get actual specific nutritional information, then you talk to a nutritionist or a dietitian. What's the difference between the two? Very vaguely oversimplified, a nutritionist is about general nutrition and gives advice to the public in general. Dietitians are more in a clinical role. They're part of the patient's treatment team in a hospital, in a clinic, so they talk to individuals about their specific medical condition. And why should you talk to a licensed or certified nutritionist or dietitian? Why should you talk to a doctor? After all, words like licensed and certified means they're not going to tell you information for free. They're probably going to give you a bill. They want to be paid for their expertise. And money is hard, right? Inflation, am I right? So it's hard to make ends meet. And isn't it better to get free information off the internet than pay an expert for their advice? Well, the answer is you get what you pay for. The value of the information only has worth if people are willing to pay for it. If it's free, then then who knows the source of that information or what else that speaker is getting out of it, if not your money. One of the things that you really need to consider is that when somebody is licensed or certified from the state, like New York State, then if they have to make sure that they get it right. If they don't, then they could lose their license, and they could then lose their livelihood. So instead of thinking of it as they have a financial interest in giving you bad information, actually they have a financial interest in giving you good information. The people who have a financial interest in giving you bad information are the ones who are giving you information for free, because they don't face the consequences of bad information. I'm talking about social media influencers who give you advice for free. They don't face the consequences of their bad information. If you follow their advice and then you get harmed, and then you go try to sue them, they can always say, hey, it's not my problem. I told you I'm not a doctor. I gave you my standard disclaimer. So if you still follow my information, then it's your problem. So they are completely immune from harming other people. So then, and meanwhile, they're not taking your money other than if they trick you into buying their products. Then how do they make a living? From advertisers. They plug items on, they sell items, and that they get a commission, they get a cut on the revenue. So the more they can convince you to do things their way, the more money they make. So that's why you need to take any free information very critically and use your thinking caps. Put on your thinking caps. You may say, well, my favorite social media influencer told me that the experts out there have a conflict of interest and they're trying to sell me bad stuff. Well, what makes you think that your favorite social media influencer is not trying to do the same thing? I mean, what is their justification when they tell you that your doctor is lying to you? What's their evidence? What's their proof? And can't everything they just said about doctors be used against them too? Then why should you believe these people who have no financial interest to get it right? Why should you believe these people and not believe these people? Do you believe these people because they look like you and talk like you and like the same music as you and vote the same way as you? Is that how they're qualified to give medical advice? All right, that's enough of my soapbox. Let's move on. So what does bother us medically more than anything else? Well, here it is. As of 2022, these are the top killers of Americans today, according to the Center for Disease Control. Yes, that Center for Disease Control, the one that's been in the news these past few months, these past couple of years. So as long as their website is still up, then you can see where the numbers are now. So you may be wondering, why is this information so old? I mean, it's already 2025. Why don't they give us at least 2024 numbers? And because it takes this much time for the numbers to percolate up from local health agencies, funeral homes, legal services, then it gets to the city, county, and then state, and then finally move up to the federal level. So it takes this much. So if you want to get 2024 numbers, you're gonna probably have to wait until 2027, 2028. Anyway, these numbers don't change year after year. I mean, they don't really change much. And their rankings of these things may go up and down a notch or two, but they more or less stay. The ones in the top 10 more or less stay in the top 10. In the class, I would have asked, what do you think kills more Americans than anything else? And there's usually somebody who says shootings or violence, homicides, not even in the top 10. I think it's in the top 20, the bottom 10, but it's not in the top 10. Why then do we always think about homicides, violence? Because that's what's in the news. But if somebody dies of a heart attack, then it's not in the news because it's not news. It's not new. People die of heart attacks all day. In fact, a lot of people die of heart attacks all year. And so, but then it's not all in one place. So that's another reason why it's not in the news. It's scattered, it's evened out. There's like a couple of people in this hospital, couple of people in that nursing home, a couple of people scattered around the city on a busy night in the 911 system. Not a couple, like several people every night around New York City in the 911 system. So it's spread out around the country, spread out around time, and so again, it's not in the news. And why does the news exist? Well, there used to be a different reason in the 1970s and 80s, but nowadays more people are finally becoming aware that news exists to sell ads. News exists now to sell clicks. So if it doesn't grab your clicks, it doesn't grab your eyeballs, they don't put it on the front page. So here's the ranking. Now, COVID, 2022, COVID was number 4, and worldwide it killed about 7 million people around the world. But this is 2022, so I'd expect that as we leave the pandemic era, COVID's just going to march its way down the list until eventually it gets merged into this respiratory diseases. I'd imagine that in 2021 it was already up in number 2, if I were to look, or competing with cancer for the number 2 spot or number 3 spot. Okay. If you find a statistic that says violence, homicides are in the top 10, you want to double check the population that it's based upon, because violence, homicides are a top 10 killer of young Americans. Young Americans. Because when you're young, then young people tend not to die of heart disease, although in increasing rates of them have heart disease, but they don't tend to die of heart disease when you're young, like the first half of life. Young people are dying of cancer in increasing numbers, but still not as much as old people. So this is actually a statistic of the entire population. If you look at statistics of the younger population, then the numbers completely reshuffle. Diabetes is a massive problem here in Queens, New York, and America, basically. But here's the thing. One thing on diabetics, well, later in this lecture, I'll tell you that diabetes, uncontrolled diabetes, damages every organ everywhere. Every organ everywhere. So by having uncontrolled diabetes, it also contributes to heart disease. So some of this might get like an assist, supplemental effect on heart disease, and diabetes is one of the number 1 causes of end-stage kidney disease. So diabetes should share some of the credit for this number and some of the credit for this number. Anyway, this is what kills most Americans every year, and since in our society, in our modern medical institutions, technology does a better and better job of keeping people alive, then the most common, the numbers who do die are overrepresented by the elderly. So you may be wondering, all right, instead of the elderly, how about people like me? You may be thinking, what are disease rates that are the most concern for people in my age range? So here's the next slide, and here is healthsystemtracker.org. I'm not that familiar with this site. Oh, well, anyway, it's from the Kaiser Family Foundation. So even though this website is a .org, which implies it is a non-profit organization, the owner is one of the largest insurance companies in the country. Kaiser is more well known in the west coast of the United States. That's where their empire is. But make no mistake, this is a for-profit company who happens to own a non-profit organization called System Tracker. So, but anyway, that's all I really know about this organization. I'm not that familiar with it otherwise. Anyway, it was the best pack of information, of data, that was conveniently available for me, so that's why I choose them. Anyway, so if you're previous slide, this is for people who die tend to be elderly, so this is like overrepresented by the elderly. And if you want to know what kinds of diseases are impacting people in the first half of their life, or maybe the middle third of their life, then you cannot really focus on death statistics. Instead, you have to focus on something else, and it's called years living with disability. So it goes like this. If you let's say somebody lives 76 years healthy, and then they suddenly get a disease, and then they die when they're 77. So that's 1 year lived with that disability. You get that? Right? So even though it's a cause of their death, it also, in this slide, counts as 1 year of living with disability. Now, what about somebody who was diagnosed with diabetes, and then they were diagnosed with diabetes when they're 20 years old, and then they die when they're 60 years old. So that's 40 years living with disability. You count them all up. So if you would count up all the people with diabetes, and you write down all the years that each individual lived with the diabetes, and then you multiply it out, and then you divide that by total years lived by everybody, and that's where you get these percents. So now you can do some ranking. So number one, the years lived with disability for people who are still, so that's for people who are living with disabilities, not dying from the disabilities, dying from disease. Then this is the ranking here. So arthritis, osteoporosis, mental health disorders, because somebody gets diagnosed with anxiety or depression, the things that we'll talk about next week in psych, in a couple of weeks, in addiction, that then they are counted in this percentage. Many young people are diagnosed with mental health disorder, and then they go on to live into old age, and so those total years lived with that disability adds to the percentages. Substance use disorders, nervous system disorders, accidents again, and then no deaths, because that's not years living with disability. Death is like a homicide or murder or shooting. Shooting is accidents, but murder it would not be on this chart, right? It's not a year lived with disability. So anyway, and it just keeps on going. People with lung diseases like asthma, chronic bronchitis. Here's heart disease again, living with heart disease, this time not dying from heart disease. Neonatal means newborn, living with cancers. So this includes all the young people who don't have cancer yet, as well as the elderly who find, the middle-aged people who find they do get a cancer, and then the elderly who are living to fight with the cancer. Anyway, and then diabetes is down here. If we go back to the causes of death and take the numbers for heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and cancer and add them together, we get almost 1.5 million. So that's almost 1.5 million people dying from these diseases, and then over 250,000 people dying from these organ diseases, and then what's left is the COVID-19 and accidents. Why did I do that? Why did I lump these? Why did I organize it like this? Because heart disease, stroke, diabetes, cancer is what we're really going to talk about today. And then if you don't take care of yourself, especially diabetes, you could end up with liver, kidney disease, and then cancer can result in lung disease. In fact, lung cancer is one of the most common cancers. So, and also heart disease, these diseases are most highly affected by behavior choices. These diseases are also strongly affected by behavior choices, but then higher percentages of like other factors like genetics and society. Well, that's behavior choice too, because liver includes like cirrhosis from alcoholism. But anyway, I wanted to emphasize the diseases that are most strongly influenced by behavior choices, because that's what this entire chapter is about. Nutrition is a behavior choice. A lot of nutrition is things that you cannot control, like the way the corporations manipulate us and play with our toggles and switches and triggers. But we'll talk about that later. So when talking about diseases, there are modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors. Non-modifiable means something you really can't do anything about. You really can't. And so that's genetics, you can't choose who your biological parents were, who provided the ovum, who provided the sperm. That's your genes. And so far, we cannot edit our genes. I say so far because every once in a while there's some news article celebrating some new breakthrough, and then it ends with daydreaming about imagine a day in the future when we can edit our genes. I think that's a terrifying idea, and there have been a couple of movies out there about what happens if society can edit their genes, but for now we cannot. And you can't do anything about your age so far. There's always some people out there trying to cure aging or solve aging or find the potion of youth, but so far no one's been able to figure out. How would you know if they did? When you see the richest and the most powerful people in the earth looking suspiciously young for their age. Other than can be explained by cosmetic surgery and living well and millions of dollars of makeup, but beyond that, they still are suspiciously youthful for what their age is. If you hear a dog barking in the background, it's my landlord's dog. They live above me. Very, very cute dog, adorable. But something seems to trigger him for random reasons. Anyway, these are non-modifiable. We're here to talk about the modifiable risk factors. So that's behavior choices, and behavior choices is because of beliefs. Whatever your beliefs are, and beliefs are based upon culture, your personality, the day of the week sometimes. Corporate behaviors, advertising, inaccurate labeling, meaning that not only if they just out and out lie on the nutrition label, but in the front of the package, they will very proudly proclaim things they want you to know that's true, but then they'll conveniently leave out the things that they don't want you to know that happens to be true. So that's misleading or inaccurate labeling, and then causing you to make decisions that are not in your best interest. Proprietary recipes means that it's a corporate phrase meaning that they are legally allowed to keep the ingredients secret. How can they do that? Well, because as soon as you turn the nutrition label around, you can see the ingredients list, and those are like the base compounds, but they don't have to tell you where they got those from. Like if it says for cheese, if they say cultures, which is how you make cheese, if they say cultures in the ingredients list, they don't have to tell you where they got it from, how they made it, they just list it, that's all. So that could have something to do with the nutritional quality of that food. Other things that we can kind of control, only in that we can, if you prioritize it high enough, you can move somewhere else. You may say, it's easy for you to say, I'm stuck here, this is the only place I can afford, or the only place I could find that's close enough to my work to make life possible. That's all true, but that's because you prioritize something else above where you live. If you really, really set your mind to it, and if something significant changed in your life that rearranged your priorities, you could find a way to move out. So all of these things become variable, become modifiable, depending on how badly you want it to modify it. You cannot change your genetics no matter how badly you want to. No matter how many lawyers you pay to argue on your behalf, you still cannot change your genetics, and you still cannot change your age. Depending on where you live, and also your financial situation, which also has a lot to do with where you live, the healthcare system has a big effect on the risk factors for your disease. America has the best medical care in the world. You may find that hard to believe, but some of the hospitals in this country are like not only world class, but like top of the world class. As in, like, if a rich and powerful person anywhere else in the world gets sick, of course they'll go to their country's capital. But if they get really, really sick, where do they go? They come here. They get a visa or something, and then they come to some of the most famous hospitals here worldwide, and they're here in the U.S. So that's the best quality medical care is available, but only if you are rich and powerful. But that means you're rich. What about the rest of us mere mortals who have to work for a living? Well, then you take what you can get. You get what you can afford. So affordability has a big say in the quality of medical care you get, and then the quality of the medical care, the kind of medical care you get, and the kind of medical care has a big impact on the diseases you get, and how well it's taken care of. I say the quality, so here we go. Availability. What good is the best hospital in the world if you can't reach it because it happened to be in a city with absolute horrible transportation system, and you don't have a car? And now what are you going to do? If it's a day's walk to that world-class hospital, then it's no good for you. So availability. Affordability is if you have the cash. Acceptability is if they treat you like a human being. Sometimes their ethic level, their morality level, their cultural understanding makes the hospital system unacceptable to you. So you have to go to another hospital that is going to treat you better. And then the quality, that's where competence comes in. Like, are they doing a good job? Are they following the latest most sensible evidence-based practices, or are they stuck in the Stone Ages? All of this is this entire slide is called multi-causational or multifactorial. So people who make podcasts and videos, they like to point to one of these things and try to suggest that it's the one thing and nothing else that's causing the problems in society today. But it's actually all of the above. I actually talked about obesity not last lecture, but a couple of lectures ago. So I won't hit you over the head with it again. Obesity is going up, not only in this country, but all over the world. And the problem with obesity is about its effects on health. So like I said last week or a couple of weeks ago, I'm not fat shaming. So it's not about appearance. It's not about attractiveness. It's not about the individual's value to society or to value to their loved ones. It's all about preventing this. It's all about preventing this. Obesity is a major risk factor for number 1, 2, kind of 3, 5, kind of 6, maybe 7. Research is showing up along those lines. 8, absolutely. 9, very much so, and a little bit of 10. So obesity is a real problem, and that's what this is all about. Obesity causes biochemical problems. It increases high blood pressure, and between the two of them, and also fatty arteries, fat deposits in the arteries, obesity doesn't cause fatty arteries, but the behavior choices that leads to obesity are the behavior choices that also leads to fatty arteries. So it's a confounder effect. What's a confounder? Go back to lecture 2 and review basic sciences video. So this is why obesity needs to be got under control by the individual, but also by society too. If if public health officials and the country as a whole could find a way to reduce public obesity, it will reduce healthcare costs by so much, because by reducing obesity, you reduce half of the numbers here. I mean, you reduce the numbers to half of the things here by significantly, and a little bit of the remaining ones. So that's why the general public has a incentive to reduce public obesity, as well as the individual. Not only am I not fat shaming, I should also be reminded to not blame the victim. So what's that? Because this is the favorite tactic of junk food companies. They make food that is absolutely irresistible, that plays on our hardwired instincts, plucking them like plucking the strings like a puppet, and then say, well, you should have known better. We didn't make you put this junk food in your mouth. We just sell it. And then it's up to you to exercise some self-discipline. That's a little unfair. That's what they're doing. What they're doing is blaming the victim. If a food company has revenue in the billions of dollars, of course they're going to spend millions of dollars on the best psychologists money can buy to find ways to make their food absolutely irresistible, so that nobody can resist. Nobody can resist the temptation. And then they turn around and then say, well, it's your fault for eating it. We didn't tell you to eat it. That's called blaming the victim. Many social media comments also do that. They blame people for being obese, and behavior choice, of course, plays a part, but living in our society almost makes it inevitable that a percentage of it is obese, and then resulting in these chronic diseases. The sugar industrial complex is a phrase that I modified. I started out as a warning about the military industrial complex, in that the American industry seems to be dependent on increasing military preparedness, and so they're sort of like a vicious cycle, and we seem to be seeing it here in the sugar industrial complex, where large sections of the American economy have become dependent, we can even say addicted, on the revenue, the tax dollars from the sugar companies. And so more and more of society is going into supporting the sugar addiction of Americans, the excess carbohydrate addiction of the Americans. And it takes a financial incentive to keep that going instead of trying to control it. Obesity does result in high blood pressure, and I'll talk about that in a few slides. I already talked about these drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, and other drugs of this category, and that it's great that it helps people lose weight, but the problem is that one of the secret or insidious side effects is that it doesn't train the person for self-discipline. When you lose weight the old-fashioned way, through diet and exercise and sheer willpower, you're exercising the willpower. Willpower is like a muscle. You don't start tomorrow saying, I will never procrastinate ever again. That's just impossible. It's like saying, I'm going to go to the gym tomorrow, I'm going to join a gym tomorrow, and I'm going to bench press 400 pounds. I mean, maybe somebody in the world can do it, but not you, not me, and you're going to break something. So you're going to rip a tendon, you're going to break a bone if you even try to attempt it. So no, don't try that much, in short. And so don't try to eat the perfect diet tomorrow. You will fail. Instead, you have to slowly grow into that diet, and slowly improve your nutritional intake gradually over years, maybe decades. You can't eat perfectly starting tomorrow, but that's what these drugs seem to be doing. They take away the cravings so that the people who take it suddenly don't feel like eating more than they need to, which is great for losing weight. But what happens if the drugs don't become available? Like the insurance company decides to stop covering it, or they lose their health insurance, and these drugs are like $1,000 a month without insurance assistance. So if the person's, or how about everything was fine for a while, but then suddenly they develop an allergy or some other medical contraindication, and they have to get off of it. But now all of these cravings come back because they never learned through this time to build up their self-discipline to resist these cravings. So the weight will just come right back. There are other side effects. There are other side effects to these drugs that are discussed in the newspapers and in articles, and you can look into that too. But for those medical side effects, that's kind of not a surprise to me. Not the specific side effect, but that the fact that a drug has a side effect, because all drugs have side effects. Name it, any medical intervention has side effects. Oxygen has side effects. Water has side effects. Riding in an ambulance has side effects. Being in a hospital, just walking into a hospital, has side effects. Everything about medicine has side effects. For the majority of the people, they don't suffer it. For a small percentage, they do feel it a little bit, and then for a very rare percentage, it's a severe side effect. When I say heart disease, I really mean cardiovascular disease. Cardio is the pump, the heart that pushes blood around the body. Vasculature is the arteries and veins that help carry the blood around the body, and the two have to be considered, the three, heart, arteries, and veins, have to be considered together as one system. Like I said before, there are modifiable and non-modifiable. You cannot change your age, and you cannot change your genetics so far, meaning that the genetics it determines the family history, the race, and also the gender. Now, before you fire off an email to Human Resource to get me fired, I need to specify that I mean genetic gender, whether the individual has a Y chromosome or not. I'm not talking about the political designation of gender. I'm not even talking about the psychological designation of gender or the driver's license designation. I mean the genetic designation, because the presence of the Y chromosome does play a risk factor for heart disease. Not saying that genetic females, people who are genetically female, don't get heart disease. They absolutely do. In fact, the rates of heart disease among women are rising, are high and rising, not only in this country but around the world too. But having the Y chromosome does seem to cause an increased risk factor for heart disease. So far, until somebody invents a way to edit our genes, your genes are what you got. The genes you got are what you got. You can't change it. Everything else is changeable depending on how badly you want to change it. Some things seem unchangeable, like stress. In our cardio, where did the O go? Heart diseases. Some things don't seem like they can be changed, but not in the near term or the short term. But they can be changed eventually, but again, depends on where you put it in the priority list. Some things above it at some point in your life cannot be changed, but it's really a matter of like, it can be changed. All of these can be changed depending on how badly or what happens in life. So, very brief review. The heart is the pump, cannot stop. Heart is a muscle, but unlike other muscles, like your voluntary muscles, if you feel the burn, if you feel an ache, you feel a cramp, you can stop, take a rest. 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, you may feel better. You cannot stop with the heart. When the heart stops, this is the medical definition of death. When you go up to somebody and check their pulse and you don't feel a pulse, that is the medical definition of death. You need to start compressions, CPR. Blood is the fluid that carries all of this goodness to every cell in the body, in the arteries, and then in the veins. It carries the blood plus the waste products from all those cells away from the cells back to the heart, where it then can be redistributed to the liver for detoxing and to the kidneys for waste removal. So if heart disease is the leading killer of Americans year after year, then how do you reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease? And here they are. You've probably heard these again and again, so none of this should be a surprise to you. You can pause and read this at your leisure. You've already heard about reducing your trans fats, which is a kind of saturated fat, reduce the sodium, and I talked about that in nutrition, maintain a healthy weight, regular exercise, physical activity, don't smoke. And then there used to be, they as in like general medical recommendation was to not drink more than 2 servings of alcohol per day for a male, 1 per female. And then it got even lower. And now the latest recommendation, the latest current recommendation is it's best if you don't drink at all. So many of you and most Americans will say that's not going to happen. You will not make me stop drinking. In fact, it's impossible to make Americans stop drinking. In fact, historically, they tried to do it. The government tried to do it. They tried to make alcohol illegal. All that ended up doing was creating organized crime. So no, we're not here to tell you to never drink alcohol, but the more you can reduce it, the better it is for your health. It's just here to say that. So whatever it is you are drinking, however much you are drinking, if you can just reduce it a little bit somehow, then it'll benefit you health-wise. When you go to your doctor and they draw blood and they're looking for these markers, they want to see LDL as low as possible. They want to see HDL as high as possible. And then if you have any of these previous risk factors for cardiovascular disease, then the doctor your primary care physician may refer you to a cardiologist, a specialist for the heart. And then one of the things they tend to do is send you to get a stress test. And for most people, that means walking on a treadmill, and they hook up electrodes to your chest to get an EKG and then see how your performance are. For nutrition, you can try to go for heart healthy foods. Pause and review this list. Again, if you actually signed up for a nutrition class, then none of these are a big surprise to you. You've been recommended to avoid these things. Too much carbohydrates. Remember the thing I said about the low fat craze? Too much carbohydrates will lead people to obesity anyway, resulting in high blood pressure, hypertension. Avoid saturated fats. A little bit is good. In fact, we're supposed to eat a little bit of everything. But in our society here in Queens, New York, in 2025, we eat too much saturated fat, so that's why we're told to eat less. Similarly, deli meats. So a little bit of sodium, we're supposed to have a little bit of sodium. Nitrate, well, nitrate is a cheap, easy preservative. That's why corporations love it so much. But unfortunately, nitrates also contribute to high blood pressure. So, just like alcohol, I'm not going to tell you to never eat deli meats, because just like alcohol, forcing people to not stop eating deli meats is just going to lead to organized crime. Instead, whatever you're eating, try to eat less. That's all. If you eat 10 pounds of deli meats a week, see if you can eat 9.5 pounds next week. That's all. Okay, moderate exercise, not extreme exercise. If you're going for the extreme exercise, see a trainer. Hire a trainer, hire a coach, talk to your doctor. But moderate exercise, like the cardio, and this is why it's called cardio. It gets the blood going, it's got the heart going. Good for the heart, okay. But only in moderate amounts. Extreme amounts will stress the heart. That's why you need to talk to a coach or a trainer. Okay, start slow, grow slow, the usual stuff from last week's lecture on fitness. You want to avoid extreme anything. Ego lifting, for those of you who are not familiar, is when people go to the gym and they set the weights too high because they think they're going to be macho about it, and they try to push too hard, and then they end up ripping a muscle, ripping a tendon, or damaging their joints, and they end up at the orthopedic surgeon's office. That's all from ego lifting. So I know how good it feels to your mind to pump higher, more than last week, and we're so used to dramatic changes in the graph from TV and movies that we demand it of ourselves, and we always want to see regular, steady improvement, especially with weights, or in general with any exercise, from week after week after week. And I'm telling you, that's ego lifting. You're not a science experiment. You're not a piece of engineering. You are a human being. You're a living organism, and your body doesn't work that way. Instead, listen to your body. Start slow, grow slow. Set moderate expectations of yourself, and if you have any doubt about whether your health journey plan is realistic or not, go ask a doctor. Avoid anabolic steroids, the muscle building thing. It's the live fast, die young. So you want to look good sooner, you want to look better sooner, well, you're going to trade something for it. I'll tell you that. Okay, some people, it's worth it. They don't care if they live to an older age. They just want to look good now. But for everybody who says, I don't care what happens to me when I'm old, how about we ask this question of you again when you're almost old? Then what will be your attitude? Then what will be your answer? Similarly, to avoid things that promise too much, that look too good to be true, you want to avoid videos and websites that promise these things, because again, they're going to push you to be too fast, too hard, too soon. You're going to break something. Why does high blood pressure, otherwise known as hypertension, cause heart disease? So it goes a little like this. Your heart is a pump. It has to push blood around the body, and the more resistance, the more pressure that's in the vasculature, in the arteries, the harder the heart has to push against it. And you may think, well, when I go to the gym, I have to push against resistance, and that makes my muscles bigger. Shouldn't that make my heart stronger? Therefore, it's better. The problem is that your heart has a chamber where blood flows into and it gets pumped out. It's not a solid muscle. It's got these caverns in it, these chambers in it. And yes, the muscle gets bigger with exercise, but the heart doesn't just get bigger to the outside, it gets bigger to the inside, which means there's less chamber for blood to go into. So the there's less blood being pushed out with every heartbeat. There's also the limits of how much the heart can handle. You go into some kind of training program and you want to lift a certain amount of weight. Okay, so you start with a beginner's level, great. You get to the intermediate level weights, great. You get to the expert levels weights, great. You get to the tournament level weights, great. You get to the world class level weights, great. At some point you get to weights that are higher than any human being has ever done in the past. And you keep pushing through, you keep pushing at it, you keep training at it, year after year after year. But you never get there because there are limits to human ability. And you may say, don't worry, advances in medical technology, in genetics, in chemistry will get me there. Well, it may get humanity in general there, but we're not talking about 50 years from now. We're not talking about science fiction. We're talking about next year. And eventually, you keep pushing and pushing, and eventually your joints will wear out. Your muscles will tear, your tendons will rip, you may even break a bone. The limits of the density of your bone are beyond what a human being is meant to take, and eventually the bones fail and break. That's what will happen to your heart under increasing resistance for long term, for chronic. There are stories of people who are famously tall, like the tallest people in the Guinness Book of World Records. They don't live very long because of all of that fluid dynamics that the heart has to deal with, and they mostly die of heart disease eventually when they're younger. So humans are not meant to deal with blood pressure beyond a certain level outside of genetic modification, mutation. So that's the problem with dealing with high blood pressure. Your heart will get stronger with moderate exercise, but only to a limit. At that point, it is starting to wear down. Here's another analogy. You own a car and you're always high revving the engine. And any mechanic will tell you that's not really a good idea. You can rev the engine to accelerate to highway speeds once in a while because that's what it was designed for, but you're really not supposed to be maintaining that high RPM, that high rev state for extended periods, because you're going to wear down the engine and then it's going to break on you. That's heart disease. Organ failure is also a problem. Your organs, where the blood is supposed to go to, are expecting a certain level of pressure. But if too much pressure is going to the organs all the time, then it eventually also causes problems too. You're kind of like, the analogy I think of is you're supposed to hug. Oh, here it is. Here it is. You're supposed to hug your organs with blood pressure, but if there's too much pressure, you're strangling your organs. This is my drawing, by the way. The information is from heart.org. Right, so how do you know if your blood pressure is, air quotes, normal, air quotes, or not? So there are two numbers that are taken at the doctor's office. Every time you go for a checkup or every time a doctor deals with you, either a medical assistant or a nurse comes in and takes your blood pressure. This dash, this divide sign is here, but you're not supposed to do math on it. It's just a separator for the two numbers, systole and diastole. Systolic is when the heart is pumping. Diastolic is when the heart is not pumping. Well, wait a minute. If the heart is not pumping, when the heart is relaxing, how can there be any pressure at all? And that is the resistance, the pressure of the blood in the arteries. It's called systemic vascular resistance, but I'm not going to test you on that. So that's why it's not in bold. Okay, so according to medical standards, the US medical standard today, these are the levels of blood pressure. So you're supposed to be around 120/80, and in the old days, 140/90 was the full-on high blood pressure, hypertension. And then there are these like levels in between. By the way, if you have a home measuring machine, or you go for like you stop at one of those desks at the health fair, or you use one of those machines at the drugstore that will do it for free, and then you get this you get some troubling number, don't panic, because that'll just make your blood pressure higher. Don't panic, but like schedule an appointment with your doctor so that you can tell them all about it. And by the way, officially the definition of hypertension is when a doctor finds an elevated number in 2 or more visits. So just one number by this random machine is not high blood pressure. It's not hypertension. Hypertension is a disease found by a qualified licensed doctor, licensed to practice medicine in the state of New York, in 2 or more visits. What are these intermediary levels? Prevention is always better than cure. Instead of waiting for somebody to have hypertension, wouldn't it be better to not let them get hypertension in the first place? It's cheaper, easier, faster, less painful, less complicated, less side effects to not let people have a disease than to wait until they do have the disease and try to cure it. So if you show up at your doctor and it's elevated, then the doctor will caution you and say you should exercise more, eat less, stop voluntarily intaking toxins. If you show up at your doctor and they find this range, then they say everything they said about this range, exercise more, eat less, stop taking involuntary toxins. But now they'll also say you could benefit from some medications that we usually give people here, but we'd like to give it to you here so that you don't end up here. Once you are at this level or higher, your doctor says, that's it. Behavior change is obviously not working. We're putting you on meds. You are now on meds. Congratulations, you made it this far. That's the idea. These intermediary levels are here to try to prevent you from getting here. This is like last exit before you enter hypertension. This is the last exit on the highway before you enter hypertension territory. So last chance to fix it before it becomes a real problem. Alright, so you don't want to become hypertensive, or you are and you're trying to control it and your doctor said you need to get the pressure down. How do we get the pressure down? Well, remember there's 2 numbers, the higher number and the lower number. So the higher number is the heart, when the heart is squeezing, squirting the blood into the artery. So how do you make the heart squeeze less? Well, you have them take less stimulants. So that's when the doctor recommends less caffeine. Nicotine also increases systolic, and other drugs. Another great way to reduce systole is to reduce stress, but I know life is stress. Life is stress, and especially life in the modern times in a modern city is stress. But that's where things like stress lowering strategies, stress lowering clinics, lowering stress is an entire industry in itself, and that's why. It's because we live in this modern time. How do you reduce the diastolic, the lower number? Because this is when the heart is not squeezing. This is when the heart is relaxing. How do you do that? So that's where you reduce fluid volume, and that's where the doctor provides a water pill, like a diuretic. But before you pay money for a medication and before you suffer the side effects of the medication, how about reducing the problem before it becomes a problem? So a change in the diet to reduce the salt intake. Instead of taking a medication to pee the salt out of you, how about changing your diet so you don't put the salt in you in the first place? Then maybe you don't need the medication. You don't need to pay the money for it. You don't need to deal with the side effects of it. What's a common side effect of diuretics? You have to get up in the middle of the night to pee. Also, you pee a lot more frequently throughout the day, which is annoying, embarrassing at the least, right? It eventually has other problems too. Increase artery size. How do you do that? Isn't this like genetics territory? Don't your arteries have the same size that you're born with, that your genes code for? That's it? No, you can increase your artery size through exercise. In fact, I talked about that last week in the fitness lecture. And another way to increase artery size is to reduce stress. I know reducing stress is hard. Nicotine, other inflammatory agents shrink artery size, and both of these happen because the body wants to increase blood pressure. And why would it want to do that? Back in our hunter-gatherer days, when tigers used to try to eat us, it was good to have elevated blood pressure in preparation for battle, for combat, for fight or flight. But it's not good to be in this state all the time. Your fight or flight response is meant to be only temporary, and then once the emergency is over, you're supposed to go back to a normal blood pressure. Reduce fatty plaque buildup, which means reduce blood cholesterol. This is not the same as dietary cholesterol, which is like the latest research coming out like last year. But anyway, you want to reduce blood cholesterol, the triglycerides. That's through a blood test. And then reduce obesity. So how does obesity cause high blood pressure by itself? A larger body size squeezes on the arteries. So imagine you're trying to pump fluid through a hose, but then your friend is standing on the hose, like a garden hose. And instead of a high pressure water system like here we have in Queens, New York, you have a hand pump. You're trying to push water from a hand pump through a garden hose, and meanwhile your friend is standing on the garden hose in the middle of it. So of course it would be harder to push blood through it. That's what's happening. A larger body size, especially fat, is squeezing around the outside of the arteries, making it harder for blood to flow. And then the lifestyle that results in obesity also is the same lifestyle that results in fatty plaque buildup. So I talked about fluid and salt in the nutrition lecture. So I should emphasize now, don't try to eat the 100% daily value allowance tomorrow. You will fail, you will give up, you will quit. Do not try to eat the normal amount of salt tomorrow. That's just impossible. Instead, realize how much salt you're eating typically on a typical day, and then reduce it by just a little bit tomorrow. That's all. And then see how much you can sustain. See how much you can maintain without quitting, without giving up. So that is your new normal. And then after you get really used to that, and then like next month, try to reduce it a little bit more again. So start slow, grow slow. I talked about the diuretics already. Oh yeah, so pause, read, and then continue. In terms of salt intake reduction, you can try to substitute salt with some things, and a popular common salt substitute is potassium chloride. Read the label carefully, but watch out. Potassium chloride is a risk for people with kidney problems such as diabetes. So if you do have diabetes or some other cause of kidney issues, ask your doctor first before you try a potassium salt substitute. I tried potassium chloride that I bought at the grocery store for curiosity's sake. I didn't like it. It just tasted wrong. I would rather eat less salt than substitute it with this. But that's just me, my own personal opinion. So the fatty plaque buildup in the arteries is called atherosclerosis, not to be confused with arteriosclerosis. Arterio is a simple hardening of the arteries. Could be from old age, could be from normal wear and tear. If after all, in reality, everything wears down. That's part of old age. And there could be other medical reasons causing arteriosclerosis, but a subset of arteriosclerosis is atherosclerosis, where the hardening, sclerosis means hardening of the artery is from a fatty plaque buildup. So here is my drawing of artery, and blood is supposed to flow through it, all nice and good. And then instead, this fatty plaque is making the space for blood to flow reduced. So imagine now you're trying to pump blood. You're trying to pump water through a garden hose that has something stuck in it. No wonder it's getting harder and harder to push fluid through. So that's atherosclerosis. Another problem with these fatty plaques is that if a piece breaks off, if a piece of the fatty plaque breaks off, it'll turn into a thrombus, which is a clot. Blood will gather around it and start to clot. And then as long as it's staying in one place, that's called a thrombus. And you can see how this clot is blocking blood flow. Then if the clot breaks off and starts to travel, it's called an embolus. And the problem here is that eventually, you see how these arteries keep dividing, branching, and getting smaller and smaller. Even if the clot is traveling, passing through an artery, no problem, eventually it's going to hit a branch where it's too small. It cannot fit, and it'll get stuck. And now the clot will just keep getting bigger at the branch, which means the organ that was supposed to be in that direction, that was expecting this delivery of fresh blood, is not getting it, and that is a massive problem. Peripheral artery disease. Periphery means not in the middle but out to the sides. So when we're talking about periphery in medicine, we usually talk about arms and legs. Artery disease. So what's happening is the arteries to the arms or legs, usually the arms are usually the legs are noticed first. The blood flowing to the legs are constricted because the arteries are too small. Now, for a couch potato, somebody who never exercises, who only stands up long enough to go to the bathroom, maybe walk to the bus station, and then to the train station, and then to work, and then does the same thing home, maybe walks from the car to the grocery store, and that's it, no other exercise, that's fine. The artery supply to the muscles for basically a sedentary life, no regular physical activity, the artery supply to the leg muscles are good enough. But then one day, this person has to run after the bus, or has to walk an extra few blocks, and then they feel this burning pain in their legs. and eventually it hurts so much that they have to stop until the pain goes away, and then they can walk again. That's peripheral artery disease. It means the arteries are too small for this unexpected physical activity. So what's the solution for a peripheral artery disease? Exercise. Exercise. You want to get those arteries bigger. How do you get arteries bigger? Through exercise. What happens is that burning feeling, when it's the same burning feeling that your gym coach tells you to feel the burn, your training coach, your training advisor tells you feel the burn, push through the pain. The pain is weakness leaving the body, etc. What happens is, as your muscles do not get sufficient oxygen supply, it starts to complain, and then this complaining is translated into hormones that are then sent up the veins, the venous system, to the rest of the body, and the signal is out, we need bigger arteries. So not only is the muscles getting bigger from exercise, but the arteries are getting bigger from that increasing demand, and then eventually it's going to take weeks to months. It's going to take weeks to months, maybe years, but eventually the arteries to those legs that now have bigger muscles can handle it. And then one day, after like months to a year of regular physical moderate exercise, and now you are at the bus station. You're walking to the bus station, and then you see the bus pulling away, and you run after it, and you're yelling, stop, stop, wait, stop. And then the bus driver finally notices you, and they're having a good day so far, so they're feeling generous, and they stop the bus and let you on, and you notice that you made it. You don't feel so bad in your legs. In fact, the little jog you just did to catch the bus is like only part of what you usually do on a typical day of exercise. You're used to it by now, and you no longer have peripheral artery disease. If you do have a cardiovascular problem and you go with complaints to your doctor, like I'm feeling so tired, or I get pains in my legs from walking, or other complaints, other symptoms of cardiovascular disease, you can Google that yourself if you're really curious. Then the doctor will do things like do an EKG, which is put electrodes across your chest and then print out a paper with squiggly lines on it. They could put you on certain drugs to save your life, and then if the EKG looks bad enough, they may send you to a cardiologist, who then sends you to various treatments like this. Hopefully, I hope you never end up dealing with these kinds of therapies, but this is very much treating the disease after you have it. It's too late now to prevent you from having this disease. Now you got it, and now you have to deal with the cost and the pain and the trouble and the bother and the side effects of all of these medical treatments, because now you have the disease. CVD, cardiovascular disease, is in general what's happening around the body. But a part of cardiovascular disease, a subset, are the vessels that go to the brain. And then it's a cerebro, which means brain. Cerebro stands for brain. Vascular, vessels that go to the brain. And then if a issue happens, it's a accident, a cerebrovascular accident. That's the technical term for what the rest of us call a stroke, where blood supply to the brain or part of the brain is interrupted, and then the brain can no longer function normally, and the people have the symptoms of a stroke. What are the symptoms of a stroke? Homework assignment. So I'm noticing that not all of you are watching these lecture videos. So to reward those who are, I'm telling you the answer, FAST. But only part of the answer, because the other half of that question in the homework assignment is to show me a link to the website that explains all this. So you still have to look it up, but at least now you know what answer to look for. So these are the symptoms of a stroke, but these are the symptoms of a large stroke. I just want to say for the record that it's possible to have a small stroke or a mini stroke where you don't have any of these things, but something else a little more quizzical, a little more curious. Then it's time to be playing the medical detective, but that's beyond the limits of this course. Anyway, these are the symptoms of a large stroke, and this is absolutely a time to call 911. I'll just tell you that sometimes somebody will have the symptoms of a large stroke, but then by the time the ambulance arrives, it's gone. The symptoms have magically disappeared. What does that mean? Does that mean it wasn't a stroke in the first place? No, it could have been a transient ischemic attack. What happened is there was a clot to the brain, and then the clot magically dissolved. And so there was a clot to the brain that caused stroke symptoms, and you called 911, and then before the ambulance arrived, that clot magically dissolved, and the symptoms are gone. That doesn't mean you can now safely stay home. No, you still have to go to the hospital, because the fact remains that a clot existed. A clot was created, even if only temporary. It means then that at any time another clot could be created. There was something that made the clot. There was something that made that clot, even if it dissolved spontaneously. And the next time it may not dissolve. So every time you see the symptoms of FAST, a stroke, call 911 and then go to the hospital, even if the symptoms disappeared, because they could happen again, and the next time it might be permanent. Another kind of ischemic means loss of blood flow. Ischemic means a clot. A clot caused the loss of blood flow. A hemorrhagic stroke is literally means bleeding, and that means there was a rupture. There was a rupture of a blood vessel in the brain. The blood vessel burst open, and the patient is now bleeding into their brain. The most common cause of rupture is an aneurysm, and here's a picture of an aneurysm. So whatever caused this, whether it's genetics or just a plain old manufacturing defect. Manufacturing defect, you mean like what happens to the things I buy in the 99-cent store? Yeah, that kind of manufacturing defect. Because the body is not perfect. Because reality is not perfect. Your body has lots of little errors and defects all over the place. And so it could be that there was a blood vessel in the brain that had this weakened wall, and under normal blood pressure it behaved itself, but then this person has a long history of chronic blood pressure, chronic high blood pressure, so it's starting to bulge out, and then one day they had a blood pressure spike, an extreme high blood pressure, either because they ate an extra salty meal and they refused to take their blood pressure medications, and then they had a piece of extremely bad news, and then they also smoked a cigarette and did a line of cocaine, and all these risk factors combined together, and it caused the blood pressure to sail through the roof, out beyond the limits of the measuring machine if it had one, and then finally it burst open. That is a burst aneurysm. That's a hemorrhage. That's a hemorrhagic stroke. Sometimes a clue that this is what happens is the patient reports a thunderclap headache, meaning that Everything was like normal, or in their view, in their life, what is their definition of normal. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, this brain splitting headache appeared. No explanation. And that is a risk, that is a sign, not 100% accurate, but that it tends to show up when somebody had a burst aneurysm to a hemorrhagic stroke. Call 911 yet again. What are the risk factors for a stroke? Well, they may be arranged differently, but these now sound a little familiar, right? Because these are the risk factors for cardiovascular disease, and these are the risk factors for diseases in general, and a lot of these seem to be behavior choices. Again, don't blame the victim, don't blame the patient. Some of these behavior choices is because we are having our puppet strings pulled by corporations. Sometimes these decisions are the best we can make in the environment we live in. We wish we could make better decisions, but our options are limited to like a bad choice and a worst choice. Anyway, these are risk factors. Diabetes is in the category of metabolic diseases. We're not going to explain too much about what exactly is a metabolic disease, but just remember that diabetes is one of them. A non-modifiable risk factor, again, here's the usual suspects, your genetics, and then how old you are. But then there are modifiable risk factors, eating too much, exercising too little, and voluntary intake of toxins, such as nicotine, alcohol, other drugs. I need to make something clear now. Did you notice that I put bold here, but not bold here? The reason why is genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. So there is this meme, there's this joke running through the internet that if you eat too much sugary foods, you'll get diabetes. But that's not completely true. You first have to have the genes for diabetes, and then you can get diabetes from your behavior. If you don't have the genes, you'll never get diabetes. Does that blow your mind? Everybody knows this guy who eats and eats and eats ice cream, cakes, never gets diabetes. Doesn't even get fat. So genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. So it's the old nature versus nurture argument. For those who've never heard nature versus nurture, wait until you take another life science class. But anyway, this is how it goes. All right. So the lucky few who don't have the genetics for diabetes, you're home free. Except you shouldn't do these things anyway, because you could end up with cardiovascular disease. So the most common version of diabetes is somebody who is obese, and then they have high blood sugar. So what, they take this machine, they stick their finger with a needle, they draw blood, they measure it, and this number is too high. And then they go to the doctor and they have this thing measured, which is blood sugar averaged over 3 months. When these numbers are too high, it's called hyperglycemia. Hyper means too much, glyce means sugar or glucose, emia is in the blood. And now, one of the reasons why diabetes is such a problem in this country and a growing problem across the world is that it cannot be felt. Hyperglycemia cannot be felt. It does not cause pain. As long as it's not extreme, it won't cause anything. And here's the problem then. You tell somebody they are diabetic, You tell somebody to control their blood sugar, but they feel fine and sugar tastes good, and the person decides, you know what, there's nothing wrong with me, the doctor must be an idiot, and they go on eating as much as they want, whatever they want. But the problem is that hyperglycemia still destroys your body one cell at a time, or part of a cell at a time. So other than genetics, what are the other risk factors? Dietary, mainly dietary risk factors. I seem to have left out the biggest one. Reduce carbohydrate intake. Wait, why am I saying carbohydrate? Didn't I keep saying sugar, 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 blood sugar, glycemia? Glyce is glucose, sugar, sugar, sugar. Remember, all carbohydrates must be digested into simple sugars in order for your body to absorb from your digestive system. So even if you can be proud, for those of you who are diabetics, by the way, you can be all proud of yourself of not having any candy or cake that day. But if you ate bread and for breakfast, and if you had a potato for lunch, and if you had a cereal for breakfast, and if you had fries for dinner, then these are all carbs. And the carbs are turned into simple sugars, absorbed into the body, and that creates high blood sugar, and the person ends up with diabetes. Otherwise, for the rest of this list, it sounds really familiar now. I'm starting to sound like a broken record. All right, for the record, diabetes is actually two separate categories here, type 1, type 2. Type 1 means you're dependent on insulin. Insulin is a hormone in the body that the body is supposed to make naturally and use naturally, but type 1 diabetes do not make enough, so that they must inject it into their bodies. Synthetic insulin into their bodies. Type 2 diabetic, the body does make insulin, but the insulin doesn't work. So they, not so much. So their body does make insulin, but their body also does not respond to the insulin as much as they should. There are, just like there's a pre-hypertension or intermediary levels of hypertension, there's a pre-diabetes called insulin resistance, where before the patient has full-on diabetes, the doctor notices something wrong in the blood tests. And then they say, looks like you have pre-diabetes. And so just like the intermediate levels of high blood pressure, where the therapy is mostly advice on lifestyle changes before they put the person on full medication. Pre-diabetes is mainly advice on lifestyle changes before the patient is put on full medications. Gestational means during pregnancy. So there is this weird phenomenon of women who were not diabetic before. They may not even have a family history of diabetes. There's no clue or suggestion that they have a genetic risk for diabetes, but then somehow during pregnancy they have all the signs of diabetes, and the blood test shows high blood sugar. So the doctors put them on diabetes medication, and then after the baby is delivered, like a month or two later, the diabetes disappears and the woman does not need the medication anymore. What's going on? The details are beyond the limits of this class, but that is a interesting phenomenon. Anyway, the treatment for diabetes, no matter who you are, where you are, is the diabetes medication. Lifestyle changes and diabetes medication. Well, wait, sugar for pregnant? What about the baby? If you reduce blood sugar levels in the mother, aren't you going to affect blood sugar levels in the baby? First of all, diabetes is the blood sugar is too high. Too high for the mom and also too high for the baby. So by controlling blood sugar in the mother, you're also preventing the baby from suffering the damages of hyperglycemia. Also, if you give the baby too much glucose, like abnormal amounts of glucose, you end up making the baby grow even bigger. So actually, many pregnant women with uncontrolled diabetes ends up with higher rates of cesarean section because the baby is just too large to be passed vaginally. So I've said this word already. What's up with insulin? Why is it so important? So I said that carbohydrates are too large to be absorbed into the body, so it has to be broken into simple sugars. Well, the sugars are now too large to be absorbed into each cell through the cell membrane. What's a cell membrane? Review biology, cell biology to help you. Anyway, the sugar is even the simple sugar is too large to be entered into this, to pass into the cell by itself. It must be carried in through a special lock and key mechanism. The insulin is the key, and without it, the sugars will stay outside the cell. Instead of going into the cell, the sugar will stay outside in the bloodstream, causing hyperglycemia. So paradoxically, the sugar levels in the blood is too high, but the sugar levels in the cells are too low because they're not getting into the cell. The cells are literally starving while the patient has hyperglycemia. Why does the cell need sugar? The cell uses sugar to convert into energy for life in the powerhouse of the cell, which is the mitochondria. So that's why we need insulin. Now, with diabetes type 1, they don't make enough insulin for whatever the reason, which means they have to have insulin injected into them. For type 2 diabetes, this lock and key mechanism is failing. So there's plenty of insulin around in type 2 diabetics, but the body is not responding to the insulin as well as it's supposed to. So it's like there's plenty of keys around, but something is not right about the lock that the key is supposed to fit into. So symptoms of diabetes are this, which is a long list, and I'm not going to test you on it. People living with diabetes, they already know this, and people who don't know anything about diabetes, don't worry about it for this class. Just know that it is a problem. If diabetes is allowed to go uncontrolled, eventually the extreme problems of diabetes is this. And I'll tell you right now that diabetes damages everything, everywhere. It's not only a problem of these organs, but it damages everything, everywhere. Now, some things are noticed. The damage to some parts of the body are noticed earlier than damage to other parts of the body, and that's where, sorry, I'm just cleaning it up. That's where we get this list. These are just more noticeable than other places, but test question: diabetes damages everything, everywhere. Well, let me go back. Here you have thirst, urination, and, well, I guess increased hunger. Thirst, hunger, and excess urination. So this is a classic medical school definition of diabetes mellitus: eating too much, drinking too much, and then urinating too often. So here's how this goes. Remember that because insulin is not made or not working properly, sugar stays in the bloodstream? Well, to simplify basic high school chemistry, the sugar acts like a solute and a solvent. It acts like a salt, and it makes the person feel extra thirsty. So by feeling extra thirsty because the sugar is acting like a particle salt, it makes the person drink more. But because they're drinking more often, then they're urinating more often. And remember that the sugar stays in the bloodstream, does not go into the cells. So the cells start complaining that they're starving, even though the person just ate a high sugar meal. Their body is still starving. So they feel it and they're still hungry, so they eat more often. So polyphagia, polydipsia, polyuria. And meanwhile, the urinating, remember, kidneys are damaged. Let me go back here. Kidneys are damaged. So what's the job of the kidneys? To act like a filter. Well, if the filter is going to get damaged, then the sugar is starting to leak out into the urine. It's not supposed to do that. Sugar is so large, it should be kept inside the body on the inside of the filter, and only salts and water are supposed to make it through to the other side. But there are holes being ripped open in the filter, and sugar, and as well as proteins, other things are now pouring across into the urine, making the urine sweet. And that is where the original phrase diabetes mellitus comes from. So yes, 2,000 years ago, doctors used to tell their patients, your urine tastes sweet today, is there anything wrong? So doctors used to taste their patients' urine thousands of years ago. Not today anymore. We have laboratory machines to do that. I hope so. I'm not going to taste anybody's urine. Anyway, that's diabetes. Okay, so now, hyperglycemia causes damage to everywhere. How? It damages the tiny blood vessels. It damages all organs everywhere. Some organs are noticed earlier than others, and here you have a short list of things you may have heard about in your next of kin, in your uncles and aunts, your grandparents may have dealt with some of these things before. And this is uncontrolled diabetes, end stage organ failure, because they never controlled their sugar levels. So what can be done? Well, it has to be monitored, and that's where these machines come in, fasting blood glucose. At the doctor, they may do this to confirm if you have diabetes or not. They're not going to do it every time, but like the first time the doctor suspects it, and then every 3 months a blood test to track how well you're doing. This test is an average over 3 months. You cannot cheat. There are stories of patients who are living la vida loca for like 2.5 months, and then 3 months before their blood test they try to behave themselves, but the A1C knows all. A1C will see the last 3 months average. They cannot fake it. And people with diabetes live with a home glucometer. So for pre-diabetes and early diabetes, the patient is recommended to try lifestyle changes. Exercise more, eat less, reduce their voluntary intake of toxins. But then if that's not working, eventually they turn to medication. Diabetics especially have to focus on a low carb diet in order to get the blood sugar down. And they have to worry about things like glycemic index and glycemic load. I'm not going to test you on this, but anybody who has diabetes, they already know all about it. So here is an explanation of glycemic index and glycemic load for those of you who are concerned about diabetes or wants to know more. But the rest of you, you don't have to read this, or you do not have to study this. This is what that finger stick glucometer looks like. There are many different makes and models, different shapes and sizes, different price ranges, etc. But it's a way to check the blood. They use a needle to stick their finger, draw a drop of blood out, and then touch it to that strip, and then it gives you a number. If you're pre-diabetic, they'll recommend a lifestyle change, but if the lifestyle change doesn't work, then they'll be putting you on medication. For non-diabetics, glucose, carbohydrate intake is just a good thing to avoid obesity and hypertension. For diabetics, it is the matter of life and death. For diabetics, sugar is a poison. Pause and read this for yourself. Just a little more detail about diabetes for those of you who are interested. I said that for people who have full-on diabetes, they need to take medication. What exactly does this medication do? They bring blood sugar down. They reduce blood sugar. They are there to treat for hyperglycemia. Why do diabetics need this medication? Because their body doesn't do it naturally. When somebody without diabetes, somebody who is not a diabetic, when they eat a sugary meal, then their pancreas, the organ that controls insulin release, will make more insulin, and just enough insulin to deal with that sugar. Everything is normal. But people who take synthetic artificial insulin or any other medication to bring sugar down, then they cannot fine-tune it. Look, you either take 100 milligrams of this or don't. You don't fine-tune your medication intake exactly to your body's needs. You're dependent on a machine to know exactly how much you need, and most people don't have the time, they don't have the sophistication to do it. So they just take a pill or inject a dose. So the amounts of insulin or other medications like metformin is the most popular, most common pill form of diabetes medication. They sometimes take too much of the medication, they sometimes take not enough. So their glucose control is not exact. For those who take too much medication to deal with the food that they ate, there is another danger. Instead of hyperglycemia, they have hypoglycemia. Hypo means not enough. Well, if hyperglycemia is a problem, then why not try to have hypoglycemia? The problem is that the brain does not have any backup energy supply. What does that have to do with anything? All other cells in your body have a backup energy supply. When there's not enough sugar going into the cells, then the cells use a backup energy supply to hold them over until they do get enough sugar sometime later. The brain does not. If the sugar level in the blood going to the brain drops too low, the brain stops working. In medicine, that's called confusion, unable to think clearly. I mentioned confusion last week in the lecture on heat emergencies. That confusion. They cannot answer their name, they don't know where they are, they don't know what time it is, and they don't know what's going on. That is altered mental status. It means the brain is not working. For heat emergencies, it's because it's overheating. For diabetic emergencies, the most common confusion with diabetics is hypoglycemia. This is a medical emergency. This is a life or death emergency. So hypoglycemia is a very real risk for somebody who takes medication that's too much for their needs. So what does that mean? If you know somebody who is a diabetic and they're suddenly confused, call 911. Don't think like, well, let's see if he gets any better. No. If you check on them again in an hour, they may be dead, or they may be in a full-on coma. Do not wait. Call 911. If you know somebody is a diabetic and they are confused, what if you have one of those glucometer finger sticky thingies? Can you use that? Oh yeah, sure. If you know how to use it, go ahead and try it. Go ahead and use it. But that doesn't change the fact that you need to call 911. So now, if you think, wait a minute, if this is a hypoglycemic emergency, that means their sugar level is too low. Can't we give them sugar and that'll fix everything? The problem is, if they are confused enough and you try to put something in their mouth, they may choke on it. Instead of going into the stomach, you may be putting that in their lungs. So that's the problem. If they are that confused, don't put anything in their mouth. Especially if you're not a trained medical professional, do not tilt their head back and pour an orange juice. You're probably pouring it straight down into their lungs and you're just making everything worse. Call 911. They will come and then fix as much as they can. If it's paramedics, as a paramedic, I've injected dextrose, sterile dextrose, into patients' veins. It helped get them back up to their usual self. But we still transported them to the hospital because that IV injection of dextrose is only a temporary fix. The hospital has to figure out what the hell happened. So they need to go to the hospital. Now, should you help them take their diabetes medication? After all, in any other disease like asthma or heart disease or anything else, if they're having an emergency, they would probably benefit from somebody helping them take their medication. But what did I say about diabetes medication? What do? They bring the sugar level down. What is the emergency here? Their sugar level is too low. So if you take somebody whose blood sugar level is too low, and you give them medication to make it even lower, you will kill them. Helping these people take their diabetes medication will kill them. Do not help somebody you know who's a diabetic, who is suddenly confused. Do not help them take their medication. Call 911. Cancer is not one disease. It is not caused by one risk factor. It is one of your cells dividing out of control. So that's it. And then what can cause one of your cells to go rogue like that? Well, all of our cells are different. They respond to different triggers. They are harmed in different ways. So it is absolutely a multifactorial disease. Cancer is a massive problem in this country. It's even listed as number 2 in the cause of deaths. Here's an update, 2024. 40% of all cancer deaths and nearly 1/2 of all cancer deaths in the US are attributable to modifiable risk factors. So there it is again. And here are some examples of modifiable risk factors. Look familiar, right? Exercising too little, eating too much, and voluntary ingestion of toxins. So what's going on in a very oversimplified view? Well, you know that your cells are supposed to divide. Not all of your cells, but many of your cells divide to make more of themselves so that they can repair, that they can grow, etc., right? How exactly does a cell know to divide? Well, it gets a signal that's saying, you there, divide. and the cell says, yes, sir, and starts dividing, well, eventually it has to stop, right? So there's another signal that comes down from headquarters that says, that's enough dividing, please stop. And you and all of the copies, the exact copies of your cells, of the cells that were made, all say together, yes, sir, and they stop dividing. And that's how things are supposed to work. With cancer, what happens is there was a mutation, and the one cell had a mutation in the stop code, stop dividing code. So when it gets a signal to start dividing, okay, it starts dividing, no problem. And then when the signal comes down, everybody stop dividing, this cell, the signal, the switch is broken, and it does not stop. And that's all it takes, and it starts multiplying like crazy. Because remember, every division creates exact copies of the cell. What are the chances of that happening? Well, it's very small, because this is a mutation, a DNA mutation, and it happens all the time when you're exposed to sunlight, when you're exposed to cigarettes, when exposed to any toxin, or just random living. Just ordinary, normal living in this universe causes mutation. And the vast majority of the mutations either destroy the cell completely or injures or damages a piece of DNA that is not actually functional. So it doesn't cause the cell to change any behavior at all. Then nobody cares. But eventually, one of those mutations goes directly into, it affects only the stop signal switch, and then you have the cancer. Now, what are the chances of that? That not only does a mutation not kill the cell completely, but it affects only that one tiny piece of DNA in the billions and billions of lines of code that the DNA is made of. Well, we have trillions of cells, and we spend, 80 years of our lives just living in this universe, and our trillions of cells are impacted by the universe and toxins and sunlight and other radiation, all of these things. So the chances that it happened to somebody is actually very real. And in fact, cancer is a very real problem in this day. Here's a diagram by drawing that sort of demonstrates it. Here's one cell, and it's dividing exact copies of itself. And then one day, one of its cells, one of its children, has a mutation that destroys or breaks the stop switch. So after dividing some more, there's a signal that says everybody stop dividing, and these here, can you see my mouse? These here stop dividing because their off switch works, but these two, their off switch does not work because their parent didn't work, and these are exact copies, and these just keep dividing. They don't stop dividing, they don't answer to the off switch, and now you have cancer. So what causes a DNA mutation? The usual suspects. Have you ever heard, don't eat this, it causes cancer, don't go there, it causes cancer, wear sunscreen, otherwise you'll get skin cancer, stop smoking, that causes cancer. So these are all of these causes, and this is just a short list, because again, cancer is not one disease. It's not one cell type. It could happen to any of your cells, mainly with the cells in you that are still dividing. So is there a way to lower your risk of cancer? Well, first of all, don't do this. If these are risk factors for cancer, then to lower your risk factors, then don't do this. But to go above and beyond, you can add antioxidants, because oxidative stress can cause cancer. So antioxidants, what are they? Like whole fruits, not processed fruits, nothing in a package, nothing in a plastic wrapper, nothing that needs a nutrition label in the back. Things that are from the produce aisle. vegetables that are from the produce aisle, not in plastic wrappers, not needing a nutrition label on the back. Vitamins A, C, and E have been reported to be good antioxidants, but watch out, because A and E are fat soluble vitamins, remember, so it's easy to overdose on. And if Americans are good at one thing, it's taking too much of a good thing. They hear that a little bit of something is good, and then everybody says, oh, then too much must be better, right? No, but you can't stop people from exercising their free will to eat too much of something. Watch out though if something is advertised as cancer fighting. It's probably a marketing trick. So double check. Okay. Some definitions here. So pause and read. Hopefully you will never need to know this definition. But if your doctor says there was a tumor but it was benign, you can relax. If it's malignant, then you're not talking to your primary doctor anymore. You're talking to an oncologist. And they won't know it's malignant until they do a biopsy. So you're already deep into this world by this time. Metastasis is the word you don't want to hear because it means it's spread. So what happens is our bloodstream, our arteries and veins are not only great ways to bring nutrients to the cells and take waste away, but it's also the superhighway in our body for anything to travel around our body. So if a piece of a growing tumor breaks off and travels through the bloodstream, it can now lodge anywhere in the body. On the venous system, it tends to lodge into the lungs first, but it could be anywhere. That's kind of what's behind the lung cancer being a higher representation in the total list of cancers, because if a metastasis from anywhere else in the body usually ends up in the lungs first. Okay, so speaking of lung cancer, then here are the symptoms you can look for. Just because you have one of these is not a reason to panic, but it's a reason to mention it to your doctor. If you have bloodstreak sputum, you should call 911. Okay, but anything else, you should mention it to your doctor. Even young people are getting colon cancer, and the best way to reduce your risk of colon cancer is to eat the right amount of fiber. Not too much, not too little. How much is the average American supposed to eat? So about 30 grams of fiber a day is right amount. That does not mean eat 100. Paradoxically, if you eat too much fiber, you will actually cause yourself to get constipation and even bowel obstruction. So a little bit is good, too much is not better, too much is actually bad. But too little is bad too. In fact, average American only gets half of the 30, only get about 15 grams a day. Colon cancer is increasing in young people. So before you say colon cancer, you're too young to think about colon cancer, think again. In the people under 50, millennials and Gen Zers, they're getting increasing rates of colon cancer. Why? Well, here are some theories, and if you search for it on your favorite social media, you'll get lots of opinions on everybody's favorite topics on why they think colon cancer is rising, but the fact remains that it is rising among young people too, so take it seriously. Get enough fiber. Breast cancer not only happens to women, men get breast cancer too. The best way to detect it is self-exam in the shower, and here's some YouTube videos on how to do that. If you detect an unusual new lump, then take it to your doctor. Doctor will schedule a mammogram. It used to be recommended for all women over 50 years old, not anymore, because the risk of false positives is becoming a real problem. So what are false positives? Go back to week 2, lecture 2 about false positives and see why it's an issue. Now it's only recommended for women who have a risk factor for it. What's a risk factor? Family history, some various genetic markers, biomarkers, those things. And then the doctor will recommend a mammogram. But if a woman has no history, zero risk factors, then the risk of a false positive upending her life is too great for the off chance that she gets a breast cancer anyway. So here are some other risk factors too. Men get prostate cancer. Genetic males get prostate cancer. I'm not talking about politically identified or psychologically identified males. So prostate cancer. And the signs, and this usually shows up in the later half of life with difficulty with urine flow. By the time you're in your 50s, your doctor is supposed to talk to you about it. So none of this should come as a total surprise. Benign. Remember that word benign? Benign means don't worry about it. So it's not yet cancer, but when the number of risk factors are high enough, your doctor may recommend a PSA, which is a blood test. It's a simple blood test. And then also, if the risk factors get high enough and the complaints get serious enough, then they may call for a biopsy. So men, you don't get a free pass. You may have to deal with a biopsy anyway. Oh, what's a biopsy? They stick a needle in there to extract some tissue so they can examine it under the microscope. Yes, a needle in there where your prostate is. Testicular cancer. So women are supposed to do their own self-exam for breasts. Men are supposed to do their own self-exam for testicles, for unusual lumps. If you find one, suddenly tell it to your doctor. It doesn't always mean it's cancer. It could be something else. But how are you supposed to know the difference, right? So tell it to your doctor. Skin cancer. To reduce your risk of skin cancer, wear sunscreen and take it seriously. And again, skin cancer is one of those things where young people think they don't have to worry. They don't care about what happens to them in their later half of life until they get there. And then they wish that they did do something about it. So take it seriously. If a new mole appears on your skin, then you can see if any of these are true. You can search on the internet for this, and you'll see examples of asymmetry, irregularity, variable color, and diameter issues. And then you can see what abnormal moles look like that should be investigated, or if it's just a mole, ordinary mole. But if you ever do see a new mole of anything, it's good to mention it to your doctor at your next checkup. And then they'll take a biopsy. The cervical cancer. So cervix is the area between the uterus and the vagina in the woman's reproductive system. And the risk of cervical cancer, the biggest risk among other risks, is human papilloma virus, and that's usually transmitted sexually. So any woman who is sexually active are strongly recommended to take the HPV vaccine, which creates a awkward situation if a teenager is sexually active but the mother doesn't know. The parents don't know. Now, how is the doctor supposed to recommend a vaccine that's pretty much suggesting that their daughter is sexually active? really awkward. But if everybody is in it for the best interest of the patient, then this conversation needs to be had. Cancer is devastating to the mind, to the psychology. Even if it turns out to be a false positive, it's still such a wallop to a person's psyche that it could cause lasting, long-term psychological trauma, which is why routine mammographies and prostate exams are no longer recommended for everybody over 50, only for people with risk factors. So now, what if it's a true positive and the person really does have cancer? Then they're pretty much seeing their life fall apart around them. So not only should a cancer patient be talking to an oncologist is a specialist in cancers, but they should also be talking to a psychiatrist or at least a psychologist to make sure that they are not suffering psychological trauma from the diagnosis. Rounding out cancer with a little bit of talk of nutrition. So, well, actually, what happens with a cancer diagnosis? So, if they catch it early and it's localized in a small space that's easy to reach, then of course they'll try surgery to cut it out, and hopefully they caught it in time. But if it's already spread so that it's difficult to get at with a scalpel, then they can try radiation, which is they put in a radioactive source they insert a radioactive source into the tumor, and hopefully that'll destroy everything within a certain radius of it, which should be the entire tumor and a little bit of healthy tissue, which is unfortunate, but it's in the radius. Unfortunately, if it's too late and it's already spread, then the only thing left is chemotherapy. Radiation and chemotherapy are notorious for causing severe nausea, and the cancer itself is a thief of calories and nutrients because it's your own cells dividing uncontrollably. So it's using up the raw materials of the cells for itself, selfishly. And so as much as you try to eat, whatever you can eat, you try to keep down, despite the nausea from chemotherapy, then the cancer cells scoop it all up. But that means then that a dietitian is absolutely a critical part of the treatment team to make sure that the person maintains a healthy, balanced diet, trying smaller, frequent meals to avoid the nausea has seemed to help. Stay hydrated, but not with processed drinks or alcohol, but healthy drinks like just flavored water. They'll find that the nausea causes fried and greasy foods to be difficult to digest. But you really should be, at this point, you really should be talking to a dietitian, not to some guy, not to some disembodied voice in an introduction to health class. We're on the downhill stretch, only 5 slides to go, really only 4 slides to go. So osteoporosis, that's the old disease of weakening of the bones. Literally, it means holes in the bones. Holes in the bones. If you go search for Google image for bones, it already has holes in it. But osteoporosis, the holes are way bigger, which means the bone is much less denser, which means it's easier to break, fracture, shatter. So even simple trips can turn into devastating leg injuries or arm injuries or anywhere else. I have been called for fractures for little old ladies, little old gentlemen, and we splint and transport them to the hospital. But that's just a symptom. There is a root cause, which is what's causing these people to have such weakened bones. Well, some of it is hormones, menopause, in women is classic because the estrogen seems to help maintain bone density, and when women no longer make their own estrogen, then they're suffering from osteoporosis. But for both genders, it's lack of exercise. So even as the people get older and their lives get start to settle down, and exercise seems to be the last thing they want to do, it's actually even more important than ever to maintain exercise, to maintain bone density. So treatment for osteoporosis is exercise and good diet that supplements the calcium. Now they may need to take vitamin D, because vitamin D is needed to help the body absorb the calcium and use the calcium. So how do you get vitamin D? Well, a great source of vitamin D is sunlight, just hanging out in the sunlight. But remember to wear sunscreen so you don't get skin cancer. But outdoor daily activity, regular outdoor daily activity is good for everybody. For those who need a little more vitamin D, then there are vitamin D foods that you can search for and try to include into your diet. And then finally, for those for whom the doctor advises, they can take vitamin D supplements. Watch out, vitamin D is fat-soluble vitamin, means it's easy to overdose and to toxic levels. So watch out for vitamin D supplements. What somebody should not do with osteoporosis, or at any situation where they want their bones to be stronger, is overdo it on the nicotine and alcohol. Gluten and celiac disease. There is a big fad for the past few years on gluten-free foods. Some people really do benefit from gluten-free foods, but some people may not need it, but do it anyway because they heard it on the internet. So I don't know who is who. I am not an endocrinologist. I am not a GI specialist, so I wouldn't know. But it does seem to me that there can't be that many people with gluten allergies in the United States to justify such a large industry of gluten-free foods. The companies don't make it because they're out of their social conscience. Okay, they're making these things because of consumer demand. Is there really that many people with celiac disease? Anyway, if you think you do have a gluten allergy, then talk to your doctor, get it verified. Your doctor will give you an allergy test, and then we'll see once and for all if you really do or don't have it. That allergy test is not only gluten, it's going to be an allergy test battery. It's going to be like 100 different things that it'll test you for, like pollen and tree bark and nuts and insect sting. It's not. These are blood tests, so no, they don't do it to you. They draw your blood into a few vials. They send it to the lab, and then they subject that blood sample to the allergen tests. You'll get this report of 100 different things and the percentage of reaction your blood has to each one of them. So there, you'll find out if you really do have a celiac gluten allergy or not. Symptoms of celiac disease reaction to gluten is this. But now, pay attention to these. Read these carefully, because you know what? A lot of other things cause these. Not just gluten allergy, but a lot of other things cause this. So is it that if you experience these things, do you really have a gluten allergy or something else? That's called making a differential diagnosis list. So who's best at working out and then ruling out one by one everything on the list until the only thing left is the one that must be true? Your doctor. Talk to your doctor. Okay, I'll end this lecture with one slide here. For any of you who are on medications for any reason, you want to read the instructions carefully, because depending on the medication, some things will react to that medication to actually result in harm. So I won't go into all the different ways that drug interactions can happen, but one thing that may have struck out at you, and you may have said, WTF, what's going on, is the grapefruit. What is it about grapefruit that shows up on contraindication lists for medications? Grapefruit juice ties up the liver enzymes. The liver is an organ whose job it is to detox your blood, and it does it through a battery of different enzymes. And your liver seems to interpret grapefruit juice as a toxin that it needs to metabolize. But every metabolizing enzyme that the liver sends to work on grapefruit juice makes it not available to deal with anything else it's supposed to be doing. So if you take grapefruit, then a lot of your liver enzymes are busy with the grapefruit juice and not doing anything else that's part of their job. And now, when you take medications, your doctor sets the dose of the medication knowing that a certain percent gets metabolized by the liver and then urinated out by the kidneys at a certain rate every hour. If you take grapefruit juice, this rate is lower because the metabolizing function of the liver for this medication is reduced because the liver is busy dealing with the grapefruit. And so the drugs stay in your system longer at higher rates than the doctor was expecting. What's the difference between a medication and a poison? The dose. A little bit of medication is good. Too much of a medication becomes a poison. So that's why the instructions say do not take grapefruit juice with this medication. Not all medications, but certain medications. That's all. Potassium, I told you, is a problem with people with kidney disease. And why should you care? What happens if your body has toxic levels of potassium? It interferes with muscle and neuron function. What's the most important muscle of all? The heart. So you could cause heart problems if you overdose on potassium. What's the most important organ of all that uses neurons? Your brain. So it interferes with brain function. So if you have kidney issues or any other reason why you need to moderate or control your potassium intake, then you want to ask your doctor before you try a potassium salt substitute. Right, this has been a long lecture, so thank you for your patience, but you now have heard enough from me to attempt the homework and the quiz. Good luck on that. I hope you learned something not only useful in class to get a better score, but also useful in life to help you on your journey to better health. You'll hear from me next week.